Well, that was a brief one, actually good, because actually John was very smart scheduling that presentation for just after lunch, because I'm going to make sure that half of you are going to sleep, because you're going to see lots of slides here. Well, as always, like with everybody else, if you have any questions, please ask as we are seeing. A brief comment on what I'm going to talk about today. I said to myself that I was not going to, but then I was just talking with Ken Roberts. I have to talk about that. Because you see, I'm a taxonomist, and I can really make your life miserable. If I said to myself that I was not going to, but I have to talk a little bit about that. What you're going to see today are the so-called Brazilian Laelias, okay? And we were discussing that there is a lot of controversy on how to accept those plants in present light of taxonomy. What's that? That? Okay. Well. Yeah. Wait a second. Let me see if I can work on this thing like this. Works? Yeah. Okay.
I just want to make sure everybody's back here.
Okay. What was I saying? No, we'll talk about the way that those plants are considered in a taxonomic light today, okay? You see, taxonomy is something that is always evolving. Every time you get new knowledge and new fields of study, we sometimes get a lot of information. Sometimes we decided to change our current ways, and sometimes there is also a counter movement on preserving what is actually known. So there's always that struggle between change and not change, okay? What we have today on that group is that there are two lines of thinking about. One way is to accept them all as Cattleyas, okay? And this is good in terms of uniformity of a group, but includes a lot of stuff that some taxonomists have a problem in considering as a Cattleya. And as a result, there is the other way of thinking, which is actually, well, considering that we all agree that those things are not really related to the Mexican Laelias, which are the original Laelias, the second way of thinking is to consider the Brazilian Laelias like different genera from Cattleya. Actually, the 4 groups of Brazilian Laelias being considered as 4 different genera. If you think of it, this is just a way for us to organize things, because if you look at the old accepted classification until like 30 years ago from Schlechter, the genus Laelia comprises of 7 sections. Those 7 sections were 3 Mexicans and 4 Brazilian. So essentially, what you're trying to do here is, should we get the Brazilian Laelias elevated to 4 different genera, or lump them to Cattleyas? Okay? But as makes no sense for us to keep discussing all these things. You see, I already lost 10 minutes trying to explain nothing to you guys. What I'm going to do here is to use our known names, because, for example, when you talk about Laelia purpurata, calling Cattleya purpurata is all fine, because you know what you're talking about. But several other species, because of priority of naming, when you put them together with Cattleyas, they just change names completely. And some of these names, people don't even know what they are. So essentially, if you want to consider all these things Cattleyas, is all fine. But I'm going to call them all Laelias, just for being practical here. And I just have about 200 slides, so I better go fast. And I'm not talking about this anymore. So if you have any questions, please do, but not about taxonomy. All right. So what you're going to do is to see the Brazilian Laelias, the main groups, and the way they grow in nature. And for some of the more showy species, you're going to see the more significant color forms and some types of improvement that people have been doing in Brazil about those plants. See, those plants are all Brazilian, and they occur in a fairly small area of the country. See, this gives an idea. One of these plants, this is one of the so-called Rupicolous Laelias, the Scaulescens. It's probably the most common species, the most widely distributed species. And you can see them growing here on iron ore. Okay, so we're going to see lots of these plants in the habitats. And seeing them in the wild, we'll be able to infer how to grow them. And sometimes you can see some of the mistakes we make trying to grow them. So essentially, I'm going to spend a few seconds here. I always start my presentations with these two maps, because those maps are good for us to understand how the climate is in South America and why the plants grow where they grow, okay? So the map here on the left is a relief map of South America, colorized for elevation. So see all the different colors mean different elevations. So we start with the dark green. It's sea level, or pretty close to sea level. As you go a little bit higher in the hills or mountains, it turns to lighter green, brownish gray, then gray, and of course white on the Andes. Interesting thing about South America is it's about the same shape as North America, if you think of it, pointed to the south and wider to the north, but the effect on the climate is completely different here because the cold fronts come from the south. And because the cold fronts here come over ocean, they fly real low, okay? So they are mostly blocked by the coastal mountain ranges here. You may ask why they don't go here. Well, the fact is most of the spring and summer have a very strong mass of hot air here that prevents the cold fronts from coming in. So they are steered that way and they hit the coastal mountain ranges. So I have a lot of precipitation here, okay? Essentially, go to the second map here. See, it's the same map, but you have only Brazil colorized here. See, Brazil covers about half of the area of South America, half of the population of South America too. And this is colorized completely differently. You see, it's colorized for vegetation. So every time you see green, dark green is tropical rainforest. Okay, so you see the most of the tropical rainforest is in the Amazon basin here, which is not important for us because there are no Brazilian Laelias in the Amazon. But important thing for us is that strip of green here, okay? You see there's a lot of tropical rainforest here, or should I say there was a lot of tropical rainforest here. This is what we call the Atlantic forests. And now why we have all this tropical rainforest here? Because you see the cold fronts hit here. There is a lot of precipitation here. So all this water here flows back to the ocean. So we have, constant fog here by the end of the day. And here we have trade winds that hit the mountain ranges here. So we have all that strip here of tropical rainforest. I said was because this is the most populated area of Brazil. So right now we have about 5% left of the tropical rainforest, which is the Atlantic forest. Only that. Most of the big cities here, Rio de Janeiro is here. São Paulo is here, and all the other big cities are on the coast. This white spots here, okay? And to the interior, you see that most of the cold fronts are blocked by the coastal mountain ranges. As a result, we get a very dry interior of Brazil. When you see some of the real Cattleya species growing there, you see how dry those plants can grow, like Walkeriana and Nobilior, for example. But in our case, you're going to see that most of the plants stay here, as in that. Okay, so look at that. I promise this is the last map you're going to see. This one here is a biome map. Biomes are the main types of vegetations you can have in a country. In that case here, see the biome one is the Amazon, the central one is Cerrado, which is not very important for us except for one thing. Here the Caatinga, we don't have any Brazilian Laelias growing there. And most of the Brazilian Laelias, if you look at the distribution map of them here, you will see that most of them grow on the coast. Now looking again to that map here, you see I put 4 different colors for the 4 different groups of Brazilian Laelias. The first group is the purpurata group. Okay, the Cattleya types are, there are 9 species on that group. Okay, and as you can see, all of them are coastal growing. So they grow at sea level up to the first mountain range here. Okay, some of them pass to the Mantiqueira, which is the second mountain range, and that's it. They don't go more to the interior. That includes the Purpurata lobata, Crispa tenebrosa, all the big flowered species, and a few species that are not that showy. We're going to see them. But the interesting thing about that is that you see that big distribution range, about half of it is just Purpurata. See, Purpuratas go all the way to São Paulo and close to Rio de Janeiro. So all this is one species, Purpuratas. And the other 8 species are on that distribution range here. Now you see, that's fine, all of them in the Atlantic forest. Now, the second group here that we have in red is interesting because you see several separated groups here. Why that? This is what we call the Adrolelias, is the Pumila group, 6 species, Pumila, Prestes, Diana, Cicorana, Jongiana, and Alaori. Those 6 species tend to grow slightly higher elevation. And as a result, you see they are found on the highlands, usually about 3,000 feet, except for Alaori, which is here. And because the main mountain ranges are separated by big valleys here, you see that here we have that distribution, which is just Jongiana. Here we have Pumila. Here we have Alaori. Oh, sorry, not Jongiana here. This is Sincorana here on the north. Jongianas are on the top here. Diana, Prestes, and Pumila all grow in this area here. Pumila has this separate population here. Now, in blue is the most interesting group, is the so-called Rupicolous Laelias. So you see, I plotted here as a uniform distribution range, but it's not uniform. Most of those plants grow on the top of the mountains, but some of them also grow in the valleys. And because they grow in the valleys, sometimes it's very difficult to separate the separated groups of plants. So I consider everything in a whole area here. So we have 9 species here, we have 6 species in red, and I have more than 50 species in blue, and counting. Because people keep describing new ones. You find that they have a very localized distribution. So a lot of new stuff is being found as we go to different areas that are now having access. Now, interesting thing is the yellow color. You see, if you look at that area here, it pretty much coincides with the Cerrado region here. See, so this is the only one species, and that group here includes only one species, which is Lundii, only one species, which has the widest distribution area of all the Brazilian Laelias. The thing is that they don't like actually to grow on the dry areas. Instead, they grow on gallery forests. So every time you see small to medium-sized rivers flowing in this dry area, that's where they're going to grow, on the forest, on the margins of the rivers, okay? We're going to see that. Yeah. Anyhow, starting with purpuratas. Purpuratas are, most people know that purpurata has all these different color variations, and it's very easy to understand when you see how common the species is. This area here, this is in the island of Santa Catarina, which is an area in Brazil where millions of plants are found. And I found millions is an understatement. They have been exported by the boatloads to Europe since more than 100 years ago. And still areas that are not disturbed, you can see plants like this. This area here, the owner, the only thing he did was to clean the grasses and all the associated vegetation, left only the Laelias. That's what happened. They just cover everything, okay? And you start seeing something here. You can find the plants growing on trees, on rocks, on depressions of rocks. So the first thing you'll notice is that those plants are not very restricted in terms of medium. I mean, they can grow on rocks, on trees, on the ground, whatever, as long as there is no competition. And this is one thing we're going to see. I'm going to start with the conclusion, but you're going to see that by the end, that most of the plants can be grown under essentially any type of medium, essentially, given that the physical conditions like light and humidity and wind are about the same, okay? Now, purpuratas, because of all this enormous amount of plants that there were and they still are in nature, there's a lot of variation. You see, they have purpuratas of essentially almost every color. I would say that purpurata is probably the single orchid species with more color variation. Now, when you look at all these color variations, you start thinking that, well, you go to the wild, you see all these different purpuratas. Not so true. You see, most of them are pretty much the type color. The problem is that here, for example, most of the plants that came here are different varieties, so you don't see the type colors. So you might have the idea that all purpuratas are carnias or calcareous. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, you can see the way they are. If you look at all these plants here, these are all jungle plants, of course, and they're pretty much the same color, but you find here a couple of lighter colored ones. These are called Rosselianas. And another thing is that because of the range of Lepidopurpuratas is so long, the plants in the north bloom more than 1 month before the plants in the south, because as you go south, it gets cooler. You have a longer winter. So the plants, they are spring bloomers. So the plants, the more to the south you go, the later they bloom. And it's unfortunate in a sense, because when you go to see orchid shows in Brazil, for example, you're not going to see all the colors in the same show. If you go in early November, you're going to see the normal colors, the Russellianas, all the ones that grow in Santa Catarina Island. And as you go more to the south of Brazil, weeks later they have different shows, and then you start seeing the Carnias, Vercauseres, Flamias, Sanguinas, and all these different ones. So yes, if you want to go to Brazil to see purpuratas in flower, you have to go several times or stay a long period of time. But anyhow, those flowers in general are about 6 to 7 inches across on average, sometimes a little bit smaller, sometimes a little bit bigger. The largest one I saw was 10 inches, 25 centimeters, but the shape was just terrible. Anyway, you're going to see that most of these purpuratas, you see how twisted the sepals and petals are. And I'm going to just add a few pictures of what has been done in terms of improvement in the last 50 years on these plants. Anyhow, they also grow on trees. This is just on the roadside. I took this picture was 8 years ago. That was my last trip with slides, which means that this is still a scanned slide, so the quality is not, not that the newer ones are better, but at least this is real bad. But it gives an idea about these big fig trees on the roadside. They can be completely covered with purpuratas. I mean, there are purpuratas everywhere on that tree, and it's just on the roadside. Of course, it's a private property, and the guy doesn't let anybody go in there. That's why probably the plants are there. Although without the artificial propagation these days with the good ones, nobody really wants to climb a tree to get regular purpuratas. But it's real nice to see them growing like this. So you know that as long as you still have the habitats, the plants are still there. Now I'm going to show just some different colors of purpurata. This is what we call the tipo. Tipo means type, which means a regular color of purpurata, which means that 99.99% of the purpurata is going to be that color, sometimes with lighter segments like this, sometimes with darker segments like this. You probably noticed that none of these are jungle plants. All these are like 50 years in artificial propagation. See, this was something that was best quality like 20 years ago, and like 5 years ago, this is the kind of stuff we have. All these here are probably, very likely, all tetraploids, the new ones that are being produced. So we get those very wide segments. And the thing is that you have to remember, these are tetraploids, but they are converted plants from real good ones to start with. So you get something like this, and you convert to tetraploid, then you get something like this. If you convert something like this to tetraploid, I mean, it's going to be nicer than this, but it's not going to be much better than that. Semi-alba is the same thing. That gives a good idea. This is a diploid semi-alba. This is a converted semi-alba from that group. You can tell the difference, much rounder flower. But as Roy said, it's a slower grower and produces likely fewer flowers on the stem, much heavier substance, much rounder flower. But if you go on a show in Brazil these days, this is the kind of stuff you're probably going to see. Some people are even ashamed to show something like that. Seriously. Well, the other colors, actually, when you start getting into the color forms, you're going to see that the improvement is not that good. Why that? Because from the tipos, you have like millions of plants to start with, okay? Now, Rocha violetas like these, they came from about maybe a dozen plants that were found in the wild. So you think, well, there is all this variation, but the color forms are real rare, really rare. So you can notice two different here. This one here came from Schusteriana, and this came from Acidocorrente. These are two jungle plants. The thing is that because they have similar colors, they are all put together as Rocha violeta. But the thing is that what people do to try to improve is selfing and then outcross both of them and then get the result, self again, outcross again. And after many, many generations, purpuratas take like 7 years plus to flower. And it's a long time it takes to improve that. Then we have the Vercauseres. That's not really a good picture, but it's not that gray. But this is one of the color forms that the shapes are still the worst in terms of improvement, because that's an interesting story about that plant. All Purpurata Vercauseres, you see today here we see only Vercauseres and Carnias, so you know that they're very common. But in Brazil, all these Purpurata Vercauseres came from two plants that were found in the wild. And this is another of these interesting stories. I'm not a good storyteller as Jeff is, but at least what I can tell you is one guy called Werkhauser, a German guy in South Brazil, he found two plants of that color, was number 1 and number 2. And everybody knew he had some different plants. For more than 30 years, he didn't even show anybody those plants. Everybody knew that he had these different plants, and he didn't allow anybody to see those plants. And only when he passed away, the widow finally sold for an enormous amount of money, those plants. In those days, when the first carnias appeared, it was common practice to exchange a plant like this for a car. Those things were very valuable because you see, you know that at that time, orchid growing was for rich people, really. So the wealthier people in Brazil were the ones that were really growing those things. And there is actually a small book, unfortunately in Portuguese, that tells a lot of these stories about these plants. And some of these things are really, some of these guys were real bad. Anyway, there is some improvement in terms of Orchids. We tried to get some with stripes and flares, but the shapes are still very bad on these. We probably have to wait like 50 more years or get a breakthrough, maybe cross with the tetraploid alba to have something like this being produced. But anyway, then we get to the carnias. All the carnias came from about I think it was 6 plants of carnia that were found, and from these 3 were complete junk in terms of using for improvement. Essentially, we have 2. We have Imperatriz and Maria da Gloria. Maria da Gloria produces this. You see, Maria da Gloria has better shape, but a very light color on the lip. Imperatriz has a shape which was not as good, but it's a much darker lip. And yes, those flowers, when they open, the colors are very intense. As time passes, the colors fade a little bit. So what people did was try to outcross the 2 and then self, etc., to try to get improved ones. And then I have other colors like Roxo Bispo and Russeliana. So these different colors, they don't look like very different when you see them like this. But the moment you put like this, you have an idea that the species is really a rainbow of colors. You essentially have all different, and there are several that are not here, like Venicolors and the Tipos. And these are just the semi-alba types, okay, with just the color variation on the lip. Then you have the ones that have the color variation on pattern. Then you have the striatas, sanguineas, flamias. Okay, these were commonplace like 10 to 15 years ago. But these days, people are improving a lot on that stuff. And now we start having things like that. This is the quality of purpuratas you're expected to see at the shows these days. See, very flat. You see, you have to understand that a lot of the improvement of these plants don't agree much with what, for example, the AOS is looking for. But you have to understand that people that that live in areas that there is one species that is a favorite species, they do all the work on that species. So what are you going to improve on that? Not flower size, because as I said, there was one with 10 inches. You're not going to get bigger flower than that. So forget about that. So what you try to improve, the most difficult thing that you have to improve in most of these orchids, which is the shape. Remember the first purpuratas all, roughly?
What's the size on those?
Depends. Usually they are about 6 to 6.5 inches. But let's put it this way. Those flowers weigh more than twice than the regular bigger flowers because there's a lot more substance here. This one here is actually a tetraploid. This one is checked. The other ones are still diploids, which means there is a lot more improvement that can be made. And now here we are kind of hitting a wall with those things. These are all tetraploids. That's about as good as they get. So the moment they get to the limit of improvement on the species, I'd say in the next 20 years, probably they have to move to something else. Maybe improve Leopoldias, because purpuratas are almost like intermediates these days. There is not much more you can do. Of course, you can produce more of those, because there are very few of those available, really, but that's the idea. Now, who was that? I think no, I'm not going to say it was Alan that was saying that people probably in Rio de Janeiro looking for Laelias on the mountains. I don't want to say anything bad about Alan, otherwise he puts my name in one of these plants. So, oh God. Anyway, see, this is the Gávea Mountain inside Rio de Janeiro. You can see, fairly vertical. Goes all the way to almost 3,000 feet. Almost 1,000 meters, a little bit below that. And you see, the forest goes to about 400 or 500 feet, and that's it. From that point on, almost vertical. And if you look carefully here, you see all these little pink spots here? You barely can see here, but you probably can see a little bit better here. This is about as close as I could get. See, all of these little pink spots here, these are all flower spikes of Laelias lobata, which means they grow attached to the vertical rocks. See, everywhere, just everywhere. And from inside that forest here, the closer you could get to them, Oops, sorry, was actually that. See, I was inside the forest here. You start seeing them from here, and you just watch because there's no way you can get there. They're just up there. So what you do is, what you used to do is you wait until big windstorms and that kind of stuff. Sometimes some of the plants just fall off. They don't get in very good shape down there, but they still can be saved. And well, I tried to go up in a couple of these places there, but it was not a very good idea. You kind of slide down; it's not nice. And these are the lobatas. You see, contrary to opposite to the purpuratas, these things occur only on that mountain. Actually, there were a few plants found in the nearby mountains, but not much, mostly in the Gavia Mountain. And it's amazing, such a compact distribution area, so much color variation there is. These are the normal color forms. There were found about a half a dozen albas, really amazing, and one semi-alba only, and like 3 ceruleas. That was it. And one concolor, the Jenny that you probably know. It's a nicely known plant in the US. It's a concolor light pink. So all these came from the same mountain. The flowers are similar to purpurata in a sense, but they are smaller. They have less contrast between the segments and the lip. The lip doesn't have the well-marked veins as purpurata. The shape is different, and the fragrance, of course, is completely different between the two. There's no way to confuse the two species. And then on the other side of the Gavia Mountain, and it's interesting because there are no lobatas on the other side of the Gavia Mountain, and this is crispa. There are no crispas facing the ocean. The crispas are all on the other side, the back side of the mountain. And this was growing about 100 yards from my old house in Rio. This is a big imperial palm tree. You see, those things go to about 150 feet tall. They're tall palm trees. You can see them from the other side of the bay, actually, in Rio. But this thing was about halfway to the top. Big clump of Leda crispa is the same group of species. Unfortunately, a few years back, I went back to Brazil, and the tree was not there anymore because it wasn't a parking lot of a gas station, but I think it was hit by lightning. It occurs all the time. And the palm tree died, and of course, the crispa was not there anymore. And you can see how serious lightning is because inside the forest, look at that. There was one year there was a very strong lightning storm there and destroyed lots of trees. And the moment that the trees are destroyed by lightning, all of a sudden the plants are exposed to full sunlight, and all of a sudden they start blooming like crazy. Because from inside the forest, you don't see them up there. See all them in flower here? And that's it. That's a normal color form. There is a little bit of variation in crispas. There are some vinicolors. There are some called carnias here. We can barely see the pink stuff here. But anyway, the flowers are small, usually about 4 to 4.5 inches across. Very fragrant. I would say there's the most fragrant Cattleya species there is. I mean, it's really fantastic. But this one, continuing on the coast, before we go to the interior, I just wanted to show that one here, just to debunk a myth that most people think that Rupicolous Laelias only come from the top of the mountains. As you can see here, this one has a very nice growing spot by the ocean at about 400 feet elevation, just that. And another thing that people mostly think that also occurs on top of the mountains are pseudolaelias. This is Pseudolelia corcovadensis, also flowering here at about 400 feet elevation, which means that some of those Rupicolous Laelias are indeed tolerant to warm conditions. Okay, you're going to see there are very few that actually grow very high elevation, and these are not available because most people can grow them anyway. They kill them, so that's why they're not available. Very simple. Okay, going to the interior. On the other side of the coastal mountain range, which is the Organ Mountains, we start having a little bit of drier climate because most of the cold fronts are blocked by the mountains, which means on the other side, it's much drier most of the year. And you start having this kind of tropical forest, but it's more of an open forest. You start seeing lots of stuff growing directly on the rocks here, lots of bromeliads, there are lots of orchids. Unfortunately, I couldn't get closer because there is a little bit of a dip in between the roadside and that rock. But anyway, lots of stuff here. This is the habitat of Cattleya schilleriana, for example, and many other interesting things. But coming back to our group, this is where fidelenses are, or I suppose they are, because nobody actually, besides the original collection of fidelenses, which was, I think, 2 plants, nobody ever found those plants again, not that we know of. But we keep selfing them, and they keep producing the same flower. So actually, I think it's kind of clear that this is a separate species, not a natural hybrid or anything like that. Flowers about 3 inches across, long spike, no fragrance at all, kind of boring. Both plants are exactly the same. And then we have the main reason why I'm not calling this thing Cattleya, because the name this, if you call it a Cattleya, it's Cattleya bicalhoi. Remember that? Of course not. Not even I know how to pronounce that. So everybody knows the letter Diana, so that's why I'm using those names. And this is a normal color form. You see those Dianas, they have a very nice lip, probably the best lip of the group. This is remember that group in red color with 6 species, Palmyra Presses, Diana, Cincorana, Jongiana, and Alaori, so that's Diana. Those flowers are about, if you spread them out, about 4 inches across, but because the petals tend to reflect back, I would say the flowers are usually about 3 to 3.5 inches across. Very nice lip, very colorful, very strong markings, but then again, has the best lip, but probably the worst shape of the group. Say they're not flat at all. That's a cerulean form, extremely dark, and actually a little bit flatter. The interesting thing about that group is that the flowers are big, the plants are small. So you can see that the plants themselves are about 4 or 5 inches tall only, and the flowers are about 4 inches, which means the flowers are about the same size as the plants. But you still have on the other side of the first mountain range, you still have some of the big species like Perenniae. Those flowers can be more than 6 inches across. It's very distinctive with the small lip and S-shaped column. This is a normal color here. This is a nice cerulean. Actually, this is the best perennial I've ever seen. Happened to be a cerulean. It happened that I killed it. So let's just erase this thing out of here. Anyway, there are other color forms. There are the semi-albus and mesianas, and there are pure albus too. And perennials are interesting because it's one of the few species that even the pure alba forms, in terms of flowers, the plants are heavily pigmented. Under the leaves is all purple. So the flowers are white, they produce white, but the plants are pigmented. Usually you try to look for the albus with the green plants, not in that case. And then of course there is tenebrosa. Tenebrosa means dark in Latin, okay? Most of them are nicely dark. A couple of plants were found with a lighter color form, and of course, according to Murphy's law, the ones with the lighter color forms are the ones with a better shape. The ones with better color, the ones with the worse shape. So people are working with that, trying to get some better shape with darker color. Of course, there is an albino here, which is a terrible plant to grow. I had 3 throughout the years, and I killed all the 3. I mean, I shouldn't say that I killed them. They died, they suicided. Because those plants are really terrible growers. I mean, terrible. But from that plant here, which is Formacina fujita, we actually produced some tenebrosas that are starting to look like a halfway decent plant. Now, I talk about that particular one here. That lip is 2.5 inches across. It's more than 6 centimeters. So you talk about a monster like this. The flower itself is like 6 inches, 6.5 inches. Very, very good shapes. But you notice that they are not the real dark ones. We're still trying to improve the color of that. But the problem is they are as slow growers as purpuratas. So they talk about 20, 30 years to have real nice ones, whatever. Somebody has to do it. You see, Roy said wisely, start early. And then you have the 2 last species, or not, the 2 close to last species of the group. One is Xanthina. Those flowers are about 2 to 2.5 inches across. Flowers are small, they are not fragrant, but then again, they produce lots of flowers on a stem. It's still the same group as purpuratas. Okay, that's a detail of the flowers here. And then you have the poor cousin here, which is Virens. Virens produces sometimes, plants are usually smaller, but sometimes as big as a crispa. And they produce a whole bunch of flowers here that are about 1.5 inches across if they open. Usually they don't open. For a couple of years, I have one of these plants on a tree, and every time I looked and just saw the seed pod, I said, what the heck, I never saw the flowers of these things. Should be some nice purple flowers. Nothing. That stuff, they're mostly self-pollinating, so they don't even open totally. They just get pollinated and they wilt. See, aptly called the poor cousin of purpurata. You have to agree with that, I guess. Okay, then we're probably going to start getting rid of the big ones and start going to the interesting stuff, which is the Rupiculus. Okay. Rupiculus are very interesting. You say Rupiculus meaning that they grow on rocks, right? But there are 3 species of Rupiculus Laelias that actually don't grow on rocks. They grow only on trees. These are Arpophylla, Cattleya, and Brevicaudis. They are all very similar. This is Arpophylla here. Bright orange flowers. The color is not showing very well here, unfortunately. But they grow usually at the base of trees inside the forest. So you look at the plant here, it looks like a big Pleurotalis, long stem with just one leaf on the top here, and the inflorescences are quite short, usually not higher than the leaves, contrary to most of the other. You see here, very easy to see. The inflorescence is actually shorter than the leaf on that one. Okay, flowers are about 2 inches across. They are very showy. They are not fragrant. And the good thing about those species that grow inside the forest is that they can be grown under more humid and shady conditions. So they are usually easier to grow. Okay, you can basically grow together like a normal Cattleya. You're going to see that some of the smaller Rupiculus Laelias, especially the ones that grow exposed to full sunlight, they are much tougher to grow if you do not know exactly how to do it. Anyhow, those plants can be up to 2 feet tall, produce very showy displays like this with more than 20 flowers on a spike. Now the second one is this one here. This, see, you have Arpophylla here, and then you have Cattleya here, which is the second species. I just wanted to show these 2 together because it illustrates one of the problems we have in artificial propagation of orchids. See, artificial propagation is all fine because you're preserving species instead of having to collect them. But the problem is that doing so, you sometimes are tempted to kind of try to improve the species a little bit over what they are. And this is a good example. You see, the Arpophyllas have a very nice color, but they don't have very wide segments. The Cattleya have much wider segments, but the color is not as intense. So what you have, people, is the same work to produce the real species, or just mix the 2 to try to get some plants with better shape and better color. As a result, what you have is that a lot of the artificially propagated batches are actually hybrids instead of the pure species. So in the end, you have artificial propagation to try to save the species. On the other hand, you're getting rid of the species to a point. And this is happening a lot in plants like Walkerianas and Nobelias. There is a lot of mixing up being done. And sometimes it's very easy to detect. Sometimes it's very difficult to detect. Because you see, you cross, for example, Lodijezia with a Walkeriana, then you cross back to Lodijezia, back to Lodijezia, and back to Lodijezia, or back to Walkeriana, back to Walkeriana. You end up with stuff that you don't know what it is. Because each of those hybrids have a different name. Say Walkeriana with Nobelias dolosa, then you cross with Nobelia. What is it? I don't know. And it's really confusing. Anyhow, this is the second species of Hydrolalia. This is Praesens. You see, remember the Diana with a nice lip and curved segments. This one is completely different. This one has a very uneventful lip, but then again is the best one in terms of shape. Very wide segments, very flat. Flowers again about 4 inches across. So look at the size of the plants. The flowers are again the same size of the plants. They can grow and flower in 4-inch pots, sometimes 3-inch pots. And the interesting thing about those plants is that because they grow mostly inside the forest, with 2 exceptions, they develop a pattern of growth which is very interesting. Instead of producing like the regular Cattleyas, that you have a pseudobulb, a leaf, and a flower sheath on top, those flowers are produced when the new growth opens, exactly like a Sophronitis, which means it produces new growth. When the leaf opens, the bud comes from inside. And it's all okay for species like this that produce 1 flower or maximum 2 flowers, like Praesens, Diana, and Pomila. But you're going to see that some of the other species have to adapt very differently to those conditions. Those plants grow inside the forest, so they can actually flower twice a year easily, because if you're growing them in uniform conditions and humid, they produce 1 growth and flower, later on produce another growth and flower. Okay, then you start seeing starting to go to the more interesting areas as you go more to the interior of Brazil after the second mountain range. This is in the Espírito Santo state. This is the habitat of Cinnabarinas. The Rupiculus Laelias essentially But we try to separate them in, the easiest way to separate them is by color. Okay, you have the orange flowered ones, orange, then you have the yellow flowered ones, and then I have the pink to purple flowered ones. And then I have stuff like a millerite that has red flowers, but is actually in the yellow flower group, just to make things more difficult. And anyway, Cinnabarinas are the largest of the, well, Cinnabarina and Angereri are the largest of the Rupicolous Laelias. Okay, those plants in flower can be up to 5 feet tall. So the plants themselves can be more than 2 feet tall with suitable belief, and the inflorescence can add, as you can see here, a lot more to the top. Those flowers can be up to 4 inches across. So these are extremely showy. And this is a very nice area. This is called the Pedra Azul, which means blue rock in the Espírito Santo, because sometimes of the day, depending on the reflection of the light, the rock looks almost like blue. Of course, this was taken like 20-something years ago. Now we have houses all around here. It's kind of not very easy to photograph these days. Okay, now go more to the interior. We're going to see that the climate actually changes as we go to the interior. We are still around, now around Belo Horizonte, which is the capital city of Minas Gerais, which is one of the largest states in Brazil, but it doesn't have a coastline. It's all interior state. But you're still in the fairly southern range of the Rupicolous Laelias, which means that usually by the end of the day, every day throughout the year, you have clouds coming, condensation, and you have a lot of humidity. You're going to see how the plants survive that. As you go more to the north, to the region of Diamantina, you're going to see that it's much drier, and you're going to see the different strategies that the plants use to survive that. Anyway, this is the Piedade Mountain, a big chunk of iron ore that for some reason is being preserved. I think now it's a reserve. You have some TV antennas here, a military base, whatever, a church. And that's why it's still there. Lots of work is here. As you can see here. And I'm not, okay, I'm not going to go into the correct names of some of these things also, because the species names change a lot regardless of the genus name, okay? This is a plant better known as Laelia flava, okay? But you see, actually Laelia flava is not a very good name in terms of description for those plants, especially considering that more than half of the Rupicolous Laelias have yellow flowers. So all of them are flavas if you think about it that way. But some of these names can be explained, like, for example, Laelia grandis, or Cattleya gigas, or Laelia flava. The thing is that by the time they were discovered, that was the first one with yellow flowers. So what the most distinctive feature of it was a yellow color. So that was Laelia flava. Laelia grandis, the same thing. Grandis means big. So when it was described, was much bigger flower than the rest of the stuff that was considered at the time. Of course, except for purpurata. But then now we have other species with much larger flowers. Tenebrosa has twice the size flower as grandis, for example. We have like more than 20 more species of yellow flowers. And Cattleya gigas, not even sure if this is the largest flower Cattleya, because Warnerites can be up to almost 10 inches in size too. So anyhow, the interesting thing is when you see them in mountains like this with pure iron ore here, see, very nice to walk here, except that the iron ore is loose gravel. So it's kind of, you have to be careful not to fall here. Because if you do fall here, you're going to fall on top of those dickias here. And I can tell you, not by experience, but I can tell it's probably not very comfortable to fall on top of those dickias. Because you see, they have a lot of these spines here. They're very rigid. And lots of spines here, which actually presents a problem. Because sometimes you put your leg inside, easy, but try to pull it back. Because those things are facing backwards, you know. However, it seems that the goats, for example, don't have a problem reaching the plants here. So they find a way around them. Anyhow, that's millerite. This is a place that I go to visit millerites. It's probably not the easiest place to access, but it's the one I know exactly where the plants are or were. But I took this picture like 30 years ago. Now we have houses around here. I still found, last year I found some plants. But the interesting thing here that we're going to see is, look at this thing here. This is just one plant. Now, the thing is that you have brush fires almost every year, so it keeps burning the backs of the plants, you see. So actually, the only thing that survive are the front divisions of the plants. So see, from a big plant here, just keep growing, burning, and just the front divisions are surviving. So you actually have lots of plants, but they're all the same because they're all from one original plant. Now, how they survive the fires? You're going to see a lot of these rupicolous letters, the way they grow. See, this one here is growing inside the crack of the rock here. So the lower part of the rhizomes and pseudobulbs and roots are all protected. So even when the fires burn here, and you see all the pseudobulbs burnt here, the eyes survive, and then when the rains come, they produce a new growth. So the plants survive that way.
Do they have any issues with diseases or anything like that much?
Nope.
Not really.
Nope. Nope. You're going to see that you see some plants sometimes totally burnt, but the front division is completely healthy. And it's the same for big Cattleyas too. Cattleya elongatas in the natural habitat behave exactly the same. So these are the Millerites. Again, normal color, fire engine red. Flowers about 2 inches across. But this is an interesting thing. This is called, well, Lilliputiana, is the smallest of the rupicolous Laelias, you can tell. The whole thing from here to here, we talk about 2.5 inches. It's really small. The flowers are about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, individual flowers. But the interesting thing about this is that I always say that people have to be careful when they do taxonomy, because you try to get features of a new species, for example, to differentiate it from the other species, right? They're already described. And the main feature used here was that Lilliputiana is the only rupicolous Laelia that always, so you never use the word always produces 1 flower on a stem. I don't think so. You see, I found several with 2, and I found this one with 3, which means that if you really have to look as it is, you say, well, that's not the species because this one has 3 flowers. It's supposed to have always 1. So that's not true. See, those things are really small. You barely can see them. I saw them 3 years ago, the last time. And I mean, when they are not in flower, you talk about that size. Less than an inch tall, those things. Really small. And again, you see, you look at the lichens here. These are lichens, the same lichens you see on trees here. Look at the lichens are actually bigger than the plants. And you have to really know where the plants are to be able to see them, and they are very well protected inside the little cracks. I mean, little cracks. There are others like Reginae, for example, that like a little bit more moisture. See the way they are growing here. Growing on a crack here a little bit. Okay, cracks here. But the interesting thing about that species is that it only grows in areas where the water seeps from the top. You look at that rock wall like this, when it's areas that are completely dry and the water doesn't flow down, there's no plants. They're only going to be found where there is some humidity. So you're starting to see that to grow rupicolous Laelias, they need some protection on the root system and that kind of stuff. They need a little bit of humidity. You have to find a way to provide humidity to them. And just growing them in pieces of rock is not going to cut it. You're going to kill them by dehydration. See, they don't grow like this. They never grow like this in loose rock. I mean, on top of the rocks, like you're trying to imitate in a pot. Forget it. That's not the way to grow them. And then we come back to the same place here. These are the coalescence in an iron ore mountain. This area was being totally mined. I took this picture more than 25 years ago, and I was there last year. The place is still there. Why that? We have to thank the economy. The iron ore industry is kind of tanking to a point in Brazil. A lot of the mining companies are closing doors. Probably competition from Asia, I don't know. But in any case, the company that owns that property here is closed the doors, which means that the place is still there. I don't know for how long, but I was really worried that I wouldn't find anything there. So you see only 2 things here. Everything that is in green here are the coalescents, and everything that is in red here is a species of Pleurotalis. You see, this is most big pieces of iron ore, but lots of loose pieces of ore. So this is about a 45-degree angle slope, you know. So you really have to be careful when you walk in here. I always suggest people that if you're not sure where to step, just step on the orchids, because the orchids are well attached to the cracks. So of course, you're not going to step on the orchid, but you step on top of them. See, the orchid is here, you put your foot here. Okay, so the orchids actually hold your foot in position.
Francisco?
Yes?
You were talking about Regina
Yeah.
never grow on top of rocks. How do you
No, none of them. I'm going to get there. Going to get there. You're going to see. The thing you're starting to see is that, first of all, those plants grow with a very little amount of soil, and they mostly grow on cracks or with some protection. I'm going to show more examples, and in the end, we're going to conclude that. Anyway, flowers about 2 inches across. In that particular place, I found albus and ceruleus. And last year, somebody found a splash petal, not me, unfortunately. Anyway, that species is the most common species around Belo Horizonte. They're just everywhere. I wish meteorites were that common, but they're not. And another thing, that species was found there in iron ore, but I found that growing in sandstone and granite rock too. So you see that they don't need the iron ore to grow. Okay, they just happen to grow there because the physical conditions are the same. See regular color, caulescence, alba. Now this is probably one of the most interesting places that you can go in around Belo Horizonte is the Karass mountain range. The interesting thing about this area is that, well, it has a very traditional church over there, okay, that they use as a hotel. Now you can actually stay there for as much as you want or as much your budget allows. Let's put it this way. It's not cheap. But anyway, the interesting thing about this is that that mountain range is the highest mountain range around Belo Horizonte. It goes to about 7,000 feet. And it's in a shape more or less of a horseshoe. You go in this way, the monastery is here, and then you go to all the mountains around. There is a big circle of mountains. And it's the only one place that has 6 species of Rupicolous Laelias you can find together. Of course, they don't all bloom at the same time, but you find 6 species there. And they mostly grow in areas like this. You see in cracks and depressions on the rocks. That's where you're going to see the orchids and bromeliads. But the most important thing that you see is this thing here, the fog. What happens is that we are still fairly close to the coast in the southern ranges distribution. By the end of the day, you have fog. So the plants are very dry during the day. We get fog at night. And we can get temperatures way below freezing on top here in the winter. The plants seem to survive well. And by the next day, when the sun shines, the fog lifts and disappears. So what you get from that? Plants are dry during the day and wet during the night. So you have to remember that those plants are actually succulent plants. Their metabolism is a CAM-type metabolism, which is a succulent metabolism, which means that they absorb water at night. Okay? And that kind of explains that the first thing that we learn when we start growing orchids, like water the plants in the morning so they are dry during the night, that's a killer proposition for these plants. And actually, for most Cattleyas, if you think of it. What I do is, even for my big Cattleyas, when I get to spring and summer, it gets too hot, I water by the end of the day. So the plants stay wet during the night. And when it gets warm again the next day, the water actually ran off. Because if water accumulates on the new growth, for example, and it warms up too much, it just cooks the new growth. And not even talking about bacteria, it just cooks. Anyhow. Oh, yeah.
Can you tell them about that?
No. I didn't put a C. Okay. What you have there, okay. The interesting thing they have there is that every night they kind of put food for the main wolves to come. So then almost every night, it fails at very few nights in decades. But the main wolves come and everybody stays there, photograph them. They're kind of not much skittish, so they actually get close to you. They just don't want abrupt movements. You just stay quiet there. They come to about here, they eat, they look at you, allow themselves to be photographed, and then walk away. Then another one comes. Usually the male comes first, and then a female comes. Very rarely the small ones come too, the cubs come too. And quite recently we have wild dogs coming too, and even other things. Birds come too. Usually they do this just after dinner, which means at about 8 or 9 o'clock. Sometimes they come like 4 o'clock in the morning. People sometimes are tired of waiting, go inside. The next day they're like, oh, they came. Did you see them? Well, that was late in the morning. But anyhow, they usually come, and the main wolves are pretty big, pretty big animals. So it's interesting to see them. And that's another reason to go there. I took a group of AOS judges last year in October to this area. And this was their main point. I was kind of frustrated because I want to see the orchids. No, I want to see the wolves. Nobody wants to see the orchids. See, now I got to a point that we were in Diamantina, and the last day, I went to see a couple of Constantia species that I know they grow on rocks. I said, you have Constantia christina here, and you have Constantia microscopica in flower. Nobody bothers. They just wanted to go back to the hotel. You know why? Diamantina has good food. People just wanted to go have a shot, go to eat. Forget about orchids. So, make me feel like a real fanatic, you know. And I thought those guys were fanatics. Anyway, this is one of the species we have there. Longipes, also known as Lucasiana. Again, you see it growing in a little crack of the rock here, totally exposed to sunlight. Totally. So I have to remember that during the day, full light, but they only survive those conditions because there is always a breeze. See, if there is no breeze there, they just cook. And another thing I found out, and it's important if you try to grow those plants, is the orientation of the plant. I think somebody asked a question yesterday about the orientation of the plant, but in terms of practical things for these plants, if you grow them under strong light, you remember that you look at the leaves, the way they grow. They produce a new growth. On a way, they get lots of light, but they don't get the full sunlight on the blades. So I made that mistake when I started growing them. I said, well, those plants grow in full sunlight. That's all fine. So I put them like this, and I put them sideways like this. So then, exposing the full blade to the sun, the plants got toast in half an hour. So you see, the way they put the blade here, maximize light, minimize temperature. If you put it like this, temperature raises to a point that just toasts the plant. So in nature, it is very important to see the orientation of the plants. In cultivation, of course, you're not going to grow them in the full sunlight unless you put a fan in front of them. But that way it maximizes the effect of light and minimizes the effect of temperature if you really pay attention on the way you orient the plant inside the greenhouse or whatever. These plants are, like this one, Cattleya, these are small plants. The plants are about 2 to 3 inches tall maximum. The plants in flower are about 4 to 5 inches only. These are smaller flowers, about 1.5 inches. These are about 2 inches across. Very showy, actually. Nice contrast between the segments and lip. Again, growing. You can see here very easily the spines of those dichias. And there are other species, like Funerai. Sanguiloba is one of the large flowered ones. Again, in the Karass. All these grow in the Karass. Depending on the time of the year you go, you see the different ones. And this is just, I put this together just to prove a point here, because most people started to think that the Funerai's were actually albino forms of Lucasiana or Longipes of whatever. But actually, they're completely different species. Different spike habit, different lips, different flowers, much smaller flowers, completely different, actually. And they're all white. So they're not albino forms of anything, unless of themselves, of course. Well, going a little bit to the north, we pass on the Pedra Mountain. Pedra Mountain is a very interesting area. Very interesting area for other plants too, not just orchids, but there are quite a few of those rupicolous Laelias that grow only there. This is one of them, Gillanii. Another confusing species because it goes from a really light colored like this to very heavily splashed like this. So if you just look at the two different extremes, you might think that these are different species. But when you go to see them in the natural habitat, you see that the southern population, I mean, south is just like 5 miles distribution, but the ones to the south are lighter colored. As you go more to the north, you start having splash like this and end like this. So actually, it's just a gradation of color of the same species. They don't have blooming shiny eyes. This is a species that almost nobody saw in cultivation. And you really have to be careful when you get here, because if you fall in here, you talk about a few hundred feet down there. This is an interesting plant. The plants are about 1 foot tall and 3 feet, the whole thing. Flowers are not very large, not very colorful, but produce a lot on a spike. Okay, as we get to the area of Diamantina, we start having very dry conditions. So you don't have any type of forest anymore, except for gallery forest. You see, the only forest you're going to find is the forest around the small streams and rivers. Now, that kind of forest is very rich in terms of epiphytes. You have Cattleya bicolor, lots of small orchids, and of course you have the Pomilus. So When you look at an area like this, you see you can find the Bigarrise growing here, but you have Pomelas, which are plants that like moisture, grow inside there. These are the Pomelas. These are regular forms. This is a cerulean form, and this is a very nice one from seed. Nice improvement in terms of shape. Those flowers are about 4.5 inches across.
My question, what elevation is that? We grow those here? Or?
Yeah, this is about 2,500 feet to 3,000 feet maximum. So yes, you can grow them. Then you're going to see a little bit of the habitat of the Lundias. The Lundias are the ones that grow. Remember the yellow section on the map? These are the ones that grow very much to the interior, to the drier areas. And it's interesting because this is a dry season. You see how dry it is? Everything looks like dead. And if you ask me if Lundias grow on rocks or trees, that kind of answers your question, right? You can see them growing on trees, and you can see them growing on rocks. They can start on the rocks and grow up in the trees, whatever. Again, telling you that if the physical conditions are the same, light conditions, air circulation, and temperature are the same, I mean, those plants are not fussy about where they grow on. If you have a concrete pole here, they're probably going to be growing on that too.
They get a lot of rainfall or not so much? Or?
Well, there is a rainy season, usually from like October. You're going to see a little bit further. From October to about March, there's a lot of rain. When it rains, it rains. You're going to see. But the rest of the year is very dry. See, that's a detail again of the little things. They look like small purpuratas. Really small, about 1 inch across. But they produce big clumps. Several color forms. There are Ceruleas, Albas, whatever. Now we are in Diamantina. This is the nicest area to see Rupicolous lettuce for several reasons. First, because it's a very gentle landscape. I mean, they have tall mountains there, but it's not as abrupt, like closer to the coast. You see, you have more of these rolling rocky hills like this. And I took this picture like 30 years ago, almost, I was 82, maybe not 30 years. Anyhow, right now we have houses all around here, unfortunately. And I took another picture last year, completely different time of the year. But you see the effect of those fires? And sometimes the fires burn on top of the rocks too, so the destruction is kind of extreme in some cases. But as most of the plants are protected with a little bit of soil, many of them survive. This is actually here. This is a type location for Exalchianas. They occur exactly on that mountain here. That's it. I stop here. There is a little entrance, little house. You park the car and just go up the hill. In Diamantina, a very common one is rupestris. Rupestris can produce those big plants like this. I mean, real big. These details of the flowers. These are old pictures. And now we have the new pictures. So I took this picture like 2 years ago. You can easily see here a little depression on the rock. Those depressions hold a little bit of soil, a little bit of associated vegetation here, little velocias, lichens, whatever. And you see the orchids are going to grow inside those little depressions. But look here, the rhizomes are protected. The eyes, you don't see anything. You just see the top of the pseudobulbs and the leaves. So if the fire burns here, like in here, for example, you see, the plant can survive because it's protected. See the effect of the fires here? The fires just burn on top, but the plants survive. They don't look very good, but you see, then again, we have a new growth coming. They just look great again, albeit with all the burned back bulbs. Anyway, flowers about 1.5 inches across. Is a very showy species. And then you come to the Bigarrise. Bigarrise grow under several different conditions, but mostly on depressions of the rock like this. You see, this is a, sometimes you might think that this plant is growing as a terrestrial here. But if you pay more attention, you see that this is base rock here. So it's just a big depression. So what you have here is about 1 inch of sand. And there is base rock under it. So this is a big pond here, which happens to be dry. So you see, I always found them dry like this because I used to go in the beginning of the blooming season. It is October. And you see, it's the end of the dry season. So everything looks pretty much like dead. You see the velose, it's all dry. Okay, but you see lots of plants here. So how can they survive all these dry conditions like this? When you go a little bit later, rain starts, that's what happens. The whole depression is filled with water, and they stay filled with water for months. So those plants are actually living inside the water for months. I took this picture last year in November. So see, the veloses all of a sudden start getting green. The Brigarais look very nice and hydrated, although you can see the results of the last fires here, see, on the dry season. And then the plants are all nicely growing and flowering with the half of the pseudobulbs covered with water. That's a very interesting picture because Brigarai in one picture growing under 3 different conditions. Inside the shrub here, in a crack here, and in a little depression here. Flowers about 2 inches across. Very, used a lot in hybridizing. It's one of the nicest of the Rupicolous Laelias. And then, of course, you have, as Roy was mentioning, interesting, when you cross a purple flower with the yellow flower, both are dominant, what you get? You got whites, or what you get is that. That's a natural hybrid between rupestris and Brigarai. Same effect of the color. See, the 2 dominant colors cancel themselves. So what you get is a white flower, sometimes a little bit of splashes here, but essentially the same thing. When you cross, when there is a natural hybrid between 2 other different colors, the effect is completely different. There's a lot of natural hybrids between those rock ring Laelias. Okay, then we get to, this is the habitat of Lelekleber, right? It's a new species I described about 10 years ago. And the interesting thing is that this is the best species to observe in the wild because they're just on the roadsides. Dirt roads, they're just past the car here, they're just here. I mean, you stop the car, they're just there in flower. See, like that. You just walk around, very flat ledges. And this picture was taken at the beginning of the rainy season, you can tell. And I took this picture, it was just the time to run to the car because all the camera equipment, everything was going to get really soaked. And when you start having rains like this, you have this for a few months until March. March, the rain stops, and then you start the dry season again. And then what you have is the plants growing nicely here, still in the dry season. See, this is a very interesting fixture there. This is the Itambé peak, the highest peak in the northern part of Minas Gerais, where Itambana comes from. Itambé here, see, it's more than 7,000 feet elevation, and all the habitats of those Rupicolous Laelias seem to go around. So every place you go, you see the Itambé at a different place. So high it is. Yeah, we're going up there. Anyway, this is still the end of the dry season. See, everything very dry. The plants are surviving because they are inside the crack. So see that. That's why I keep telling people, you like to have those plants pot-bound. I grow the Rupicolous Laelias, usually small plants like this in 2-inch pots. And people keep asking, when do you repot them? I say, well, if you grow them in plastic pots, you wait until the pots get deformed. How is that? Because the new growth starts pushing the walls of the pot like this. And the pots are not square around anymore. They get deformed. So that's about the time. And on the clay pot, I mean, you wait until they crack. That's the right time to repot them. So they actually need a small pots with not much medium, but the medium has to hold some moisture. Because you see, that's the way they grow. See, they put the only way they survive in areas like this because they put the roots inside the cracks. Inside the crack, there's a little bit of black soil, just a little bit, enough to hold humidity and nutrients for those plants. So what I suggest, some people that grow in clay pots grow them in sphagnum moss, which is fine. Even in plastic pots, sometimes I grow them in sphagnum moss, but then I put a piece of styrofoam peanut on the bottom just to get a little bit of drainage. Or you can use any sort of peat mix with some bark or perlite, whatever. A very fine mix, that's what they like. But small pots, you have to remember that. Anyhow, those plants are about 2.5 inches tall with flowers, small plants. And that's why they grow here. See, cracks, 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 all in cracks. You don't see the plants growing exposed on the bare rock like this. They never grow like this. They always grow in cracks or the depressions. That's the flowers here. And again, with the effects of the rain, you have that. You see, a dry pond and a wet pond here after the rain starts. So the plants again are growing inside the water. When you have more rain here, it's going to have more water here. Then let's go north of Diamantinus. You have the Angereres. These are very tall plants. The plants in flower, again, up to 5 feet tall. I had one in flower, which was exactly that one here. Fire engine red thing. 44 flowers on a spike. The thing was that high like this. Only once, never again. Now I'm happy if I get like 5 or 6 flowers on that plant. It's still alive. Amazing. I didn't kill it. Anyway, those flowers are about 2 inches across. Very, very showy too. And this is what happens in these are natural hybrids, okay? This is X. britoi. This is a natural hybrid between rupestris and Miranda. That's a friend of mine that gave my name to the species. It was not me. You see, it's not ethical for you to give your own name to the description of a species. Anyway, it's a hybrid between an orange species and a pink species. As a result, instead of getting white like you have with the yellows and purples, you have all these art shade tones here. See, this one here, this one here. These are all the hybrid. Again, see, that's a hybrid between an orange and a pink.
What are the species again?
Miranda and rupestris. 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 Miranda. Yeah, Miranda. Yeah. Yeah, that. And you see again the dreaded dichias here. So anyway, this is the Itambé, the highest mountain that we saw from the distance before. See, I was there. This is a very old slide. There's terrible reproduction, actually, but I have to go there again to take better pictures. I took this picture in 1983, I think. And from that point here, we still have like 5-6 hours to get to the top. But this is a very interesting area because it's a longer hike, but it's not very difficult. It's just tiring. This was probably the only time that I sit. I have a very heavy backpack. I was close to the top. I said, I'm not going one more step on this thing. I have to stop. Well, it's an 8-hour hike up, so I had to sleep on top there. Fortunately, they had some TV stations there. There was a little house there that we had a very nice place to sleep. A very comfortable, pure concrete floor with the engine noise of the generators the whole night, like here. So, but consider the options. The options would be to sleep outside, and the guy there would make sure that we knew that they had jaguars there. So I said, well, what to do? Anyhow, the interesting thing is that because it's so dry, it's the only place you can actually go above the clouds in Minas Gerais. You see, we are going up. The next picture is from the top facing that area here, see? From the top, we were there when I took the other picture, see? After 5 hours, that's where we are. And you can easily see that you're way above the clouds. And of course, before you get to the top, you have to go to the Sirikiti Bridge here. See, all rusted cables and rotten wood. And if you fall here, it's a 500 feet drop. So, and on top of that, it's all very windy, you know, it's kind of, but, yeah. No, that's Christine. I told her not to move, and she said, this is not going to move. Don't worry about that. Just hold like this and wait until the wind stops. But you can tell there are some pieces missing here. So actually, but I heard that they because this area is now a park, so I heard that they replaced that bridge. I'm only going to believe when I see it. Anyway, we are at about 6,000 feet here, and this is one of the places where you have one of the cool-growing Rupeculus Laelias. This is Laelia tambana. It grows only above 6,000 feet. So this is the one you don't want to grow, because even if you want to grow, you're not going to be able to. So you don't want to grow. But some people grow them in Brazil, actually in cooler parts of the country. See, there are not that many plants here, again growing on cracks. And this, because the conditions here are so extreme, so much wind, so dry, and the plants are very compact. When you put them in pots like this, after many years, they start getting more and more elongated. You grow them under shady conditions, comfortable conditions, see they start producing longer spikes and longer plants. And of course, the reason we went up there was to try to find Jongianas. I have some pictures in the habitat, but the pictures are not good, so I decided to get some pictures that I took in a nursery of a friend of mine. This is the regular color, and of course now we have albas, which are tetraploids to boot. So these are exceptional albas. You talk about 6+ inches flowers. Look at the substance and shape of these things. Nice. And finally, we got to the end of our trip. This is the Colossal Mountains in the state of Bahia. Remember that when you saw the reds, there was a little distribution on the north. This is the Chapada Diamantina, and this section is also known as Colossal Mountains. This is coffee plantation. You have to go up here to see the cincoranas. Actually, it's a very interesting hike, and you see lots of them. I took this picture 2 years ago, so the place is still full of cincoranas. They grow mostly on velosia trees, like shrubs like this. This is the big velosia. Flowers are about 4 inches across. Very nice landscape. And you can see that they can actually grow on depressions on the rock as terrestrial. These are all old pictures again, so not good quality, unfortunately. But anyway, they grow sometimes on the rocks, and they start on the rocks and climb the velosia. Sometimes they grow on top of the velosia, sometimes on the rocks. So again, you see that those plants like to be pot-bound. They don't grow with a lot of organic matter around them. You see, it's just a little bit of a depression or a weight on those velosia branches. They actually throw their roots inside the velosia branches here. And that's why in the past, we used to receive here in the US, all the cincoranas used to come in small sticks of velosia because you cannot really rip them from the velosia. The roots go inside. So they used to bring with the velosias. Of course, now that you cannot bring the velosias, and all the cincoranas are artificially propagated anyway, so they come bare root. These are the cincoranas, regular forms and a selected one. A few ceruleas showing different of colors, color pattern on those ceruleas. Again, you see how small the plants are. The flowers are same size or bigger than the plants. Interesting little species. And well, when you go to the coast on the state of Bahia, that's a problem with the Atlantic forest there. It's all being cut for agriculture, for development, or for logging. So this used to be the habitat of Grandis, Cattleya, Metistoglossa, all these things. The thing is that they don't cut everything at once. You see, they just, first of all, they collect the important woods here. And then they leave it something like this. Then they cut a little bit more. Then they cut a little bit more. So in the end, there is nothing there. See, fires already passed here because they cut and burn. That's the pattern. So that's Grandis, you see, which means Laelia grandis, the big Laelia. It's not that big anymore. I mean, half of the species in that group are bigger than that, the flowers. But again, that was at the time why it was named. And the last of our hydrolaelias is Alaori. It grows in a mountain range close in the state of Bahia, close to the coast, at about 2,000 feet elevation. So this is the lowest elevation species, easier to grow, very small, looks like a Sophronitis. You see, same pattern of growth. The flowers come from the new growth. Flowers about 1.5 inches across. If they spread out, I would say 2 inches, but they are always a little bit cupped like this. This is albino form. This is an orlata form. Usually they are very light pink. Not much variation on the species. So as I said, the important thing is that as long as you have habitats, you still have the plants. Pressure for collecting these days is not very important. The thing is really habitat destruction, like you can see here. See, this is the Itabirito Peak, where actually the Laelia milleri come from. You see, this picture I took in 1982. See, the thing is that this is the largest solid piece of iron ore in the world, which means that it's very solid there. You cannot, today is a reserve here, it's preserved. You cannot collect, you cannot destroy the peak. But that doesn't deter the mining companies. So this was in 1982. When you look at the Google Earth picture now, you see that the peak, the needle goes to about here, like this. You see those levels here, they're about here. A good 500 feet at least, dug more. So but it's still there because it's a solid piece of iron ore. Okay, time to wake up. And that's it. Sure.
You referred to a wet season and dry season.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make sure, I think I know the answer, but the wet season would be also the warm season.
Correct, yes. It's usually by mid to end of a spring, that's the rainy season. Goes all the way through the summer. The hottest time is the more humid time. And usually by the end of summer, beginning of fall is when the rain stops.
That's when we should pay attention to watering and letting them dry seasonally.
Yeah, in the hot time of the year, yeah, correct. Yes.
In
I'll
the
be
cool
with you in a
time
sec.
of the year, you let them dry.
Oh no, I should say about watering at the end of the day. No, yeah, the dry season, the cold, when it's cold, you let them dry, yes.
You showed a picture of Ruprestis in a depression surrounded by lichens
Mhm.
and mosses maybe. So I wonder if there's some kind of symbiotic relationship between all three of those plants.
No, I don't think so. It's just the plants just grow together there because the seeds of the orchids are able to germinate there because there is a little bit of protection by the lichens. I have in another presentation, I actually show a gradation of that, just a bare rock and then the lichens starting. You see the pattern of the lichens starting to eat on the granite and then accumulating a little bit of soil. You have a sequence of that. So no, it is just that happens to grow like this. They can grow without the lichens. Okay, one don't need the other. It's just that in that particular photo, they would just grow together because it was a little bit of a bigger depression, so it had more soil to allow a little bit more stuff to grow there. But sometimes it's just a tiny amount of soil, almost nothing. Yes?
Is there an Ubatuba florist?
Sorry? Ubatuba is a city in the state of São Paulo on the coast. Yes, so you go from Rio de Janeiro on the coast, you pass from to Angra dos Reis, Paraty, and then you have Ubatuba is the next large city. Yes, so this is the forest that goes from Ubatuba to the Serra do Mar, to the Organ Mountains on the back, yes. So yes, some of the sophronites come from there, the coccinus. Oh yeah, purpuratas go there. Purpuratas start just on we leave Rio de Janeiro and get into São Paulo, that's where the purpuratas start. And they go all the way in the state of São Paulo until you get close to the state of Paraná, which has a small coastline. They are totally absent there. If you remember that first distribution, you have two different sections. There is a section where the purpuratas are missing. It's in the state of Paraná. People think that this because of the prevailing winds, that the seeds haven't had a chance to go there and colonize in there. That's why the species is absent there. However, you have Cattleya forbesi, for example, that has a continuous distribution there. So you think, well, the wind prevented the purpurata but didn't prevent the forbesi. Yeah, because flowering season is different, so they seed in a different time of the year. So usually when the forbesi release the seeds, there is wind there, okay, blowing in one way that allows them to go in. When the purpurata seed, the wind pattern is different. That's one way to explain it, otherwise, I don't know.
Do the different color varieties of Laelia purpurata bloom at slightly different times in cultivation in the same,
Yes.
they're all in the same greenhouse? at the
Yeah,
same
they
place?
do, but that's exactly what I'm telling you. They start, the ones from the north, because it's warmer, they start blooming first.
No, but
Wait,
they're in the
I'm
same
getting,
place.
I'm getting there. Slow down.
Okay.
As you go more to the south, they bloom later, okay? So the last ones to bloom are the sanguineous, okay? What happens is that the sanguineous came from the southern range of the purpuratas. That's why they flower later. So if you have Typos, Russellianas, Rocha Violetas, Carnias, Vercausaris, Flamias, and Sanguineas, they're going to flower in that order in a greenhouse because they evolved to flower a little bit more into the winter. So even in Brazil, they do that. So when you go to the show that's why I told you, you go to the Joinville show, it's a big show there, mid-November. You're going to see Typos, Russellianas, and a few Rocha Violetas. You're not going to see a sanguinea, period. You're never going to see a sanguinea flowering in November. You go to Brazil, the sanguinea starts blooming early December to late December to Christmas time.
Follow-up question. The Typos probably...
Hate this guy.
The Typos probably came from the entire range.
Correct, yeah. So you can have
There are
Typos
Typos that
flowering
bloom
throughout the range.
throughout
Yeah,
the
the
time?
flowering season, yeah.
But then you were saying most Typos flower at one particular...
No. What I'm saying is that when you go to the early shows, for example, you're going to see only Typos, Russellianas, and Rocha Violetas. But when you go to see the late shows, you're going to see Sanguineas and Typos
I see.
and other things too. But I mean, you're not going to see Russellianas in December. You're going to see only in November.
Yeah.
And you're not going to see Sanguineas in November. You're going to see them all in December.
And it must be then that these different color varieties were just, even when multiple clones were found, they were all found in the same area.
You see, the two Orchids probably came from the same seed pod. The guy found the two together the same day. So they probably came from the same seed pod, and that's it. Never again an Orchid was found, period. Yes?
You said, you were mentioning watering during a hot day, you'd water at night, but then
Well, by the end of the day, not necessarily at night, but usually when the temperature drops, so you don't have any problem with cooking the plants.
And then on the following day, if they're still wet, you said that you'd water again? Or
No. The thing is that the important thing is the next day, when the sun shines and starts warming up the temperature, the plants are dry enough, so they are not going to have any water in the new growths, for example, that will cook. If you water early in the morning, you see the hottest time of the day in Central Florida now is 7 o'clock at night. So if you water early in the morning, half of your plants are going to be toast by the end of that same day, because it's going to be the whole day cooking plants. Because the water is going to fall inside the new growth and all this stuff. It's terrible. The roots, everything is going to get damaged.
I think it's called blanching.
It's called murder.
If you have a particularly warm month that it's forming versus particularly cold, do you notice a difference in the richness of like the color in the plants, the flowers?
Yes, usually.
Which is better? I mean, which
No, depends on the particular plant. For example, Sophronitis, not Coccinia, for example, not just the species, but the hybrids are well known to produce richer colors, redder colors when it's cooler. So species that flower twice a year, for example, some of the early Sophronitis hybrids, Coccinia hybrids, if they flower when it's warmer, they are more purple. When they flower when it's colder, they are bright red. So yeah, there is a difference, yes. And the problem I have in Central Florida, for example, I have the Cattleya intermediates flower for me, Lodigiasis perfectly, because they flower around February, March. It's cool, right? Lodigiasis flowers can last up to 6 weeks for me. But when the Purpuratas flower, May, June, the temperature rises to a point that the flowers last a few days sometimes. It's just too hot for them. So I never have good flowerings of Purpurata in Central Florida unless I put the cool pads or air conditioning like Frank does. That works? Okay. Okay. Oh, no, not her, no. Not her again. Yes, ma'am.
The ultimate mix for you for Rupicus Laelias.
Because I'm lazy, the ultimate mix for me is Faggot and plastic pots. If I would do something seriously, I would probably use like use a mix, a fine mix, okay. But the things that I don't have that many Rupiculus Laelias to a point that I have to grow them separate from the other plants. I grow most of everything together. So it's just a small pot with a fine mix. Seedling mix will do. Some seedling mix. Not necessarily, no. You can, well, I would suggest you grow with granite. But for example, in Florida, granite is kind of, but whatever you do, don't put limestone. Don't do that, because none of these plants grow on limestone. There's no limestone in Brazil in these areas, okay? It's granite, sandstone, or whatever, no limestone. None of them grow in limestone. Somebody asked me once, oh, it's okay, you can put these little pellets of limestone, that would be nice. I say, yeah, right. For your paths, because the paths grow in limestone in the wild, but not these plants, no.
What about the stay-life or the hydrophores?
But that will do. Anything that there is neutral, sterile will do.
Piggybacking on her question about the wet season and the dry season, the seasons are opposite from what we have.
Correct, yes.
So if
Ah!
that's my question anyway. So if we're buying plants coming in from Brazil, say at Redlands, dry, bare root, and they're coming in off of your summer, which has been wet, and now they're going into our
Yeah,
summer,
you
which
see.
is wet, how
You see
do
that-
you adapt that? Because I've lost.
You see, that's the problem I have. I finally decided that the best time to bring plants to the US is March and September. Why that? Because you get mild temperatures one way or the other. You see, the problem is you bring them in July, for example. The plants are in the middle of the rest period in Brazil, cold, right? And they get here the blistering summer. They dehydrate to death. So what I do, I mean immediately. So what I do every time I bring plants from Brazil, even on the right seasons, I pot them immediately in sphagnum. Because doing this, what happens is that you keep the moisture on the roots and you don't need to water that frequently. Because if you think you're going to replace the humidity with lots of waterings, you're going to end up rotting the plants. So that's the problem. So if you don't water, they dry off, they die of lack of water. If you water too much, they rot. So put sphagnum for just a few months, just for the plants to produce new roots and say they don't dehydrate.
Last question for Bill Peters.
Okay.
If Millerite grows on iron ore and you have such a problem growing it, just putting some rusty nails in it.
I don't think it's going to work, and I actually don't need to do that because you see, for example, millerites, I think they grow mostly on iron ore, but not always. See that place that I showed is not iron ore, it's granite. And coalescence, for example, grow equally on iron ore that I show. They grow on sandstone a lot, and they grow on granite also. So they actually don't need the iron ore.
Do you get redder flowers with the iron?
I never noticed that. I mean, the reddest one I have right now, it's in flower, and it's in sphagnum. Okay.
We're going to take a break now, but first thing I want to do is get the picture of everybody that's here right out front. We do this every year.
I hope you had the survey before.